Our story begins in the center of the world, where monsters dwell on the white snowfield, a white serpent that devours glaciers, a gray bear that causes earthquakes, a vile rat that pollutes the seas. But an emperor who returned alive from the white snowfield once said this: "The most dangerous thing there isn't the monsters. A muscular man destroys a scorpion, so a guy mutters that always wearing ignorance like a badge is just what you expect from a barbarian. He wonders how much longer he has to hang around these blockheads, so a girl asks what ignorance is and if she can eat it. The barbarian and the girl start eating the scorpion's meat, so he questions if he didn't just explicitly tell them not to eat that or they'd die. He says it hasn't even been a week and they've already gobbled it up, so she hurriedly says that was quite the admirable change. Greta, the barbarian, suddenly starts choking, seeing which the girl hurriedly tells him to snap out of it and starts slapping him to wake him up. The guy says this isn't what he wanted to do at all. He wanted to go to a fantasy world, a world of wonder and magic. He quit his job and went on a journey. He climbed the tallest mountain on Earth, reached the Earth's core, traveled to the southernmost point of the planet, but of course, nothing happened. Reality is the farthest thing from fantasy. Every night he prayed that when he woke, he'd be in the heart of a fantasy world, and one day, that prayer was answered. As some people are walking alongside a carriage, a man says it's really freezing, so someone else tells him to wrap up in more fur if he doesn't want to die. Another guy tells the captain that no matter how good his reward is, this is still suicide, so he must be insane for crossing the white snowfield. However, the captain tells him to be quiet and reminds them that they all agreed. He says he didn't know it'd be this bad. Meanwhile, a butler asks Milena of House Akasha if she's all right, so she confirms that she's fine. They hear the guy from before whining about how he's going to freeze to death, and the butler angrily stares at him, but Milena tells him to not be too harsh since they're the only ones willing to guard them through the white snowfield. Milena asks if they shouldn't bring her inside now, since she looks absolutely frozen. However, the butler declines and reminds her of what exists on the white battlefield, and she remembers that it's monsters. Long ago, an emperor who wished to grasp the world itself in his hands sought to conquer the white snowfield, so he led every strong fighter and soldier he had and entered the snowfield himself. A few years later, the empire collapsed, forgotten, its ruler presumed lost. Then, the emperor returned with all his fighters and soldiers gone and only his body remaining. He looks decades older and spoke like an unhinged man. He said there are monsters in the white snowfield, but the most dangerous thing isn't a monster, it's the barbarian, a hellscape from which no one ever returns alive. The butler says that's surely just a legend, but she says the emperor's words carry weight, and most of the creatures he described were later discovered. However, the butler says no one ever discovered a barbarian. The captain tells everyone to stop and notices something out there, but he can't see clearly. When he realizes how it is, he says he has good news and bad news. The good news is that he's small, and the bad news is that it's coming right towards them. He sees that it's a human and realizes it's a barbarian. The man says he couldn't stand the sight of the other barbarians, so he came here for a stroll and didn't expect to run into outsiders in the battlefield, so it must be a stroke of luck. The barbarian, Catal, cheerily says it's a pleasure and sees that they're mercenaries protecting the caravan. He suggests turning back but doubts they will, so he says he'd love to be hired too. The captain is shocked to hear this, so Catal says he's offering to help them cross the battlefield. The captain asks if he's not hostile, so he says they'd all be dead already if he was. The captain asks Milena if she heard that and asks what she'll do since he's asking to be hired as a mercenary. She asks what would happen if they fight, so the captain says he wouldn't recommend it, so she orders him to tell Catal they accept. They accept, so Catal says they don't need to be scared since they're just employees. Catal wants to meet their employer and approaches the carriage, so the other mercenaries ask their captain if they shouldn't stop him, so he asks if they're joking. Catal asks if he may enter the carriage, so Milena permits him to come in. As he's sitting beside the panicking butler, Catal hopes they've calmed down since he has no intention of harming them. He sees that it's quite warm here and says, even though it's indoors, it must be difficult to maintain this level of warmth in a snowfield. So Milena says it's handled by magic. He says even though this place is dangerous, the chances of them passing through safely with those mercenaries are very low, which is why he will protect their lives. However, he has one condition. He wants knowledge from outside the snowfield. He says she won't lose anything if she agrees, so she wonders if there's even a choice to begin with. She agrees and introduces herself, so he introduces himself too and says it's a pleasure to work with her. He, who longed for a fantasy world, woke up one day to find himself a barbarian in a snowfield. There was no time to figure out why, since the only things that existed here were a terrible cold and endlessly strong monsters. He led a tribe in the snowfield and hunted to survive, desperately enduring. Without knowing how much time had passed, for countless years, He constantly tried to get out of this terrible snowfield. However, an unknown force prevented him from leaving the snowfield and told him he can leave the snowfield upon completing the quest. Just as he was about to give up on everything, he doesn't know why people would willingly come to a place this terrible. But sometimes people from the outside would show up, and he realized that the world outside this terrible snowfield was the world of fantasy and magic that he had so longed for. It was a fantasy world, and from then on, he began to act in earnest, not just to survive. He tramped monsters and solved the quests given to him one by one to get out of the snowfield with the single thought that someday he would get out. Since he can't leave, the information he gets from those who come from the outside is incredibly precious. However, most of the humans he's met so far have either panicked and pulled out a blade or have gone crazy, half crazy. He wonders how long it's been since he's had a conversation with a civilized person since he's been around barbarians for so long. He says he knows they're moving weapons and asks if there's a war going on right now, so she reveals that the Empire and the Kingdom are currently at war. He sees that the outside isn't completely peaceful either, and she explains that the Great Empire is pushing with an overwhelming force of numbers, but the Kingdom isn't easily giving in, and swordmasters and heroes are protecting the borders. Surprised, he asks what kind of power they use, so Milena asks if he doesn't know about mysticism. He reminds her that he's never gone outside of here, so she explains that a power called mysticism exists in the world. Only a very small number of people can sense or use this power, and they are granted one of the 5 ranks of strength. First, the 3rd rank, which refers to those who can sense the power of mysticism. From the 2nd rank, there are people who can use the power of mysticism. Next is the 1st rank. These are those who can materialize the power of mysticism into mana, or aura, and people like knights, wizards, and elementals usually belong to the 1st rank. Beyond that, the ranks are meaningless because they are beings beyond human perception. But if she were to tell him, the transcendent are people who can dominate mysticism and use it freely, capable of splitting the sky and the earth, and the swordmaster belongs to this rank. The heroes are monsters who go beyond dominating mysticism and influence the world itself. A hero is a legendary being in and of itself. She says the very fact that their strength is quantified and given a name is proof of their strength, and even a 3rd rank is considered a strong person in a small territory. Catal says he would like to meet them and tells himself he must get out of this battlefield. Milena asks if he's a barbarian, so he says one could say that, and she reveals that there's a legend about him. After hearing the story of the Emperor, Catal cheerily says he thought that man was a lunatic and that judging by the number of weapons, and asks if there's a reason to specifically pass through this snowfield. She reveals that they need a lot of money since their family has been in commerce for generations and they've accumulated quite a bit of wealth, but due to sabotage from rivals, they're currently in debt, and this expedition is to prevent the downfall of their family. Catal sees that they plan to sell weapons to the opposing country and asks if there's no other way to get to the kingdom, so she confirms this and remarks that this is impossible since she heard the legendary Barbarian was an uneducated savage. She asks who he is, but they suddenly hear a noise, and Kettle says it seems like they've got some uninvited guests. They encounter a black slime, and Milena says quite a few strong adventurers have challenged the white snowfield over the years, but few have made it back alive. She asks Catal if he knows what it is, so he says they're chewy little things and not bad for a snack. Milena is shocked to hear this, so she asks if she wants to try one and suggests that they can catch some. As the black slime roars, Catal says he made a pact with her and promised to protect their lives, so he's not moving unless there's real danger. She asks what he means, so he says the mercenaries can handle the slime just fine, and he needs to gauge the level of strength out here himself. As the mercenaries start fighting it, the captain hurriedly tells them to scatter and coordinate since black slime can only move in straight lines. They manage to puncture one of its eyes, and captain tells them to keep attacking. He sees that regular attacks don't work and orders them to aim for the core since it's hidden somewhere inside. He swiftly manages to stab through the core, and the mercenaries happily start celebrating, but a huge wolf suddenly appears in front of them, so the captain tells them to go for the neck. After defeating it, a mercenary wearily says the white snowfield isn't that impressive, so the rumors might have been blown out of proportion. However, he tells them to not let their guard down since they're not even halfway through. A guy asks if they're sure that the barbarian is actually strong since he's just part of the Emperor's legend and is supposedly at the bottom of the food chain in the white snowfield, but he's still clinging to them for protection, so they should at least verify his strength. A mercenary tells Milena he'd like to have a word with her and explains that they've put their lives on the line to carry out this mission, and as mercenaries, they entered a contract with her, so she says she's truly grateful she accepted the request and has always appreciated it. The mercenary says there's still one thing bothering him. The barbarian hasn't even fought once, so they'd like to confirm whether that barbarian really deserves the special treatment he's getting. The captain worryingly says he tried to stop them, but they wouldn't listen. Catal says he doesn't mind showing his strength, but now's not the time since they have visitors ahead of them. Something menacingly says fragile mortals from the outside have arrived, and it's been a while since they've had a delicacy, so they should struggle as much as they can, since that will only add spice to its meal. A giant snake appears in front of them, so everyone hurriedly covers their ears, but Catal says these are his snakes and tells the snake to go back. The snake asks Catal if he's forgotten the rules of the Snowfield, so Catal says that's none of his business, but the snake tells him to not be ridiculous and declares that he is Snake Barbarian. He questions how Catal dares to give orders to him, so Catal sees that he needs a beating and punches him, causing a gigantic explosion. As the smoke clears, the snake is lying on the ground and Catal says he's the kind of guy who only listens after a good thrashing. He says he'll finish this up and tells Milena this won't take long before rushing forward and punching the snake. Later, the mercenaries hurriedly apologize to Catal for doubting him, but he admits it's not easy to trust a stranger. As they continue moving, Catal says, judging by Milena's clothes and way of speaking, she doesn't seem like a simple representative of the family, so he asks why she's personally on an expedition. She reveals that she is the first daughter of Velika, a concubine of Sir Kasak Akasha. She says she and her mother were only family in name, but in reality, they're nothing, and are treated like servants. She reveals that she volunteered for this expedition, so Catal says she's quite and has great ambition since she's greedy. They arrive and finally see grass, so Catal asks Milena how she's going to return. She says they'll pass through the Empire, so he says passing the border won't be too difficult since they'll be empty-handed. She asks what he meant when he said she was clever and ambitious. So he says if she personally moves and forges a path to salvation when the family is on the brink of ruin, so she'll be the one the people will trust and follow. So he asks if her goal is to seize real power in the family. She admits he's right and remarks that this barbarian is quite smart, so she wonders if her power could become her force. She suggests that he could come with her if he's thinking of leaving the Snowfield, so he says he'll decline for now since he still has some things to do. In that case, she gives him a gold piece and tells him to look for her family with this if he ever comes outside. He cheerily says he'll gladly accept it if it's a gift, so she hopes they meet again someday. 5 years later, all the conditions have been met, and Catal is informed that he can leave the Snowfield, so he remarks that this is finally his first step into the fantasy world he's always wanted. As Catal steps into the fantasy world, he tells the Snowfield he's never coming back and says he's going to enjoy this world now. If it weren't for his desire of the fantasy world, he would have died long ago since the Snowfield was a hellscape you couldn't survive with mere will to live. He wonders how he should introduce himself. An elven elder tells the villagers that this shall be their new home from today. A man asks if this place is really safe, so the elder says this is an extremely remote area and humans can't reach it. He assures the man nothing from the Snowfield will come here either, since it hasn't in thousands of years. Additionally, even if the monsters do come, they still have Her Majesty, and not even the monsters of the Snowfield can lay a hand on their queen. As he's walking, Catal suddenly notices an elf and says he must be really lucky. The child wonders what she should do since she's wandered too far and falls unconscious when she sees Catal. Catal wonders if she should take her to her village and remembers that elves are really peaceful, so they might even welcome him. However, the elves are shocked to see that someone could break the barrier, and a woman hurriedly tells Catal to hand over her baby. As the elder realizes the humans must have come prepared, Catal sees that he'll need to clear up the misunderstanding first and puts the kid down, telling her to return to her people. However, she starts crying and hurriedly runs towards the villagers, so Catal wonders if his face is really that scary. He tells the elves they should be able to see that he's not hostile, but the elder quickly orders the men to attack since the hostage has been freed, so Catal inwardly questions if they're even listening to him. Catal remarks that elves are more barbaric than he thought and admits their brutality is understandable. He instantly destroys the arrows and tells them to calm down before releasing a huge attack. The elder watches in shock as Catal says he's not their enemy. A flaming arrow suddenly drops on him as the elves realize their queen, Marsaria Hashiane Karusia, has arrived. She learns that humans have attacked and sees that even this place isn't safe, but Catal wishes they'd listen to his story. The elder shockingly asks how he's still standing after taking that attack, so the queen says humans truly are vile creatures. She introduces herself as the queen of the leaf tribe, whose leaves turn brown with the seasons, and warns that he will pay dearly for daring to covet them. Catal wonders if they can't even talk even when they're clearly speaking the same language. He questions if she's just ignoring him and remarks that one thing he learnt was that if they don't listen, just hit them until they do. She shoots a draconic arrow at Catal, but he punches it back, causing a huge explosion. Catal sees that she should have held back a little more, as Marsaria remarks that her opponent is at least superhuman level and wonders why someone that powerful would be here. She tells everyone to run and acknowledges Catal's strength, but she declares that he will never achieve his goal, so he mutters that he just wanted to talk. However, Marcheria summons a huge fireball, which turns into a flaming beast, Fiego. Catal is excited to see a summoning since the creatures in the Snowfield were all horrifying and alien. A few had a fantasy-like appearance, but most were just unpleasant. But the one before him now, a bull with horns ablaze in flame, that's a fantasy. Marcheria orders Fiego to annihilate the enemy before him, so it remarks that summoning contracts are nothing but a hassle since they only bring trouble. Marcheria silences him and inwardly says she normally wouldn't have been able to summon a spirit of this level, but with help from another tribe, she barely succeeded in forming the contract even though she didn't expect to summon him like this. She tells Fiego to fulfill its contract so it sees that it has to kill the human before it. However, after taking a look at Catal, it wonders if that thing is even a human. Thank you for watching. Do you like this manga so far? We'll be back for another part very soon. Please like and subscribe to JockJut Manhwa for more amazing videos. The story continues as Catal watches Fiego in awe and wonders if this is a real fantasy since that's a summoned beast. Marcheria tells Fiego that a human has intruded upon their land, so it questions how a pathetic human dared to covet the races of nature and decides that it will reduce Catal to ashes and leave nothing behind before suddenly starting to rush towards him. Marcheria shields herself from the impact caused by Fiego colliding with Catal. However, Catal unexpectedly stops Fiego with one hand and says a beastly form puts him at ease since it makes it easier to beat it to death. He suddenly attacks Fiego, causing a gigantic explosion. Marcheria sees that Catal is still standing in shock and falls on her knees, questioning what this is. She mutters that this can't be real and asks him to please spare her kin, so he says he's not her enemy. After a long conversation, they finally came to accept it, that Catal truly wasn't their enemy. Marcheria apologizes to him and admits they judged too hastily. She remarks that they've committed a grave sin since they mistook the one who brought back their child for an enemy. Catal says it's fine and he understands since they said they were driven here by humans, but he says it's still a little sad that they never gave him a chance to explain. She again asks if he's really not one of the humans chasing them, so Catal says this is his first time seeing an elf, and there aren't any in the white wasteland to begin with. She shockingly asks if he's the ashen barbarian of the wasteland, so he says that's what outsiders call him. Marcheria mutters that that's impossible since she didn't think humans could even survive there and asks if him coming out of the wasteland means others could come out of the wasteland too, so Catal says he's not sure, but doubts anyone would, remarking that there are strict rules in the wasteland, and even powerful beings like serpents can't deny them. However, for some reason, he was able to bypass them in the form of a quest, but that's probably a very rare exception. Marcheria sighs and says, that's a relief, so Catal asks if her summon is okay since he split it in half. Marcheria tells him there's no need to worry since spirits are beings of nature and when forcibly unsummoned, they simply return to the spirit realm. Catal is surprised to hear that it was a spirit, and Marcheria admits she's been rather rude to him, so she asks if there's anything he'd like and says she'll do whatever she can if he wishes it. Catal asks if beings other than elves can make contracts with spirits, so she worryingly says that might not be possible, but among humans, those with a deep affinity to nature can sometimes form contracts. Catal sees that it is impossible after all, but she pauses for a moment before telling him to go to Elfo Sagrado if he truly wants to contact a spirit. Catal repeats the words in confusion, so she explains that it's where the god of the elves resides, the holy land of all elves, and admits it might be possible for him for a contract with a spirit there. Catal asks if a human like him would even be allowed in a holy land of all elves, so Marcheria says he normally wouldn't, but it should be fine with her introduction. Marcheria agrees to tell him where it is, but says he must keep it to himself. The Holy Land of the Elves, Elfo Sagrado is the dream destination of every elf researcher, but for elves, letting a human near that place is incredibly dangerous. So to protect a place more precious than life itself, no elf would ever reveal its location. But still, she admits she wants to believe in him. She gives him a crystal and tells him to take it with him, so he says he'll accept it with thanks. She warns him that even if he gets close, their god may still test him, but she thinks he'll pass and wishes him luck, so he thanks her. Marcheria again introduces herself as the queen of the leaf tribe that turns brown in autumn, Marcheria Hassiane Carusia, and asks what his name is, so he introduces himself as Catal the Barbarian. Later, Catal runs through the forest while on the border of the Varcon territory, and the guards hurriedly sense that something is approaching and admit they don't know what it is, so they quickly sound the bell to call all guards to arms. As Catal arrives in front of the territory, they shockingly realize who he is. Catal smilingly greets the guards, but they hurriedly wonder if that loud noise just now was him, and if he's the Ashen Barbarian. They warn him that they'll attack if he gets closer, so Catal says he would prefer if they calm down since he's not their enemy. The guard asks what he seeks from them, so he says he wants to visit their territory. Kettle sits down with a guard who asks if his goal is to pass through, so Ketal says he'd like to stay here for a while if possible. He gives his name, so the guard asks if he has someone who can verify his identity or any form of ID. Kettle says he has no such thing, but he remembers what Milena gave him and asks if this is enough to verify his identity. He reveals that it's the crest of House Akasha that he received from someone of the bloodline. The guard guesses that they must be from the Danian kingdom and explains that it's a house that's been gaining prominence lately since their power grew rapidly since a new head took over a few days ago. Ketal asks if this is enough to confirm his identity, so the guard mutters that it doesn't look fake, but he can't confirm it either. He admits it's helpful and allows Ketal to enter on one condition. They need confirmation that he's not a threat. There are 3 others trying to enter the territory right now. The condition is to clear a dungeon near a domain with those whose identities are unclear. Ketal says that's easier than expected and accepts, but the guard says there's one more condition. The guard says after clearing the dungeon, he must report everything that happened inside. Ketal sees that those with unclear statuses are made to observe each other and, in the process, they identify any suspicious ones. The guard remarks that he thought barbarians were just a brute race and says they should end the talk here and get going. The self-proclaimed paladin, Alessandro Tyrannus, says going into a dungeon with rats that go after people's pouches is still tragic, even if it's the law. Cain Hark, a thief, asks why he's picking a fight and if he's mad at him because a thief stole his fortune and scammed him. Alessandro angrily asks how a thief dares to insult a paladin like him. However, Cain asks if this is how a paladin dresses these days and says a real paladin wouldn't even be here in the first place. He's just a wandering warrior who calls himself one and a bottom feeder like him. Alessandro angrily brandishes his sword, so Cain asks if he wants to go and questions if that ragged armor will protect him. As they're getting ready to fight, the cleric of Colossia, Hayes, asks if they can please stop and wonders if entering a dungeon with the 2 of them will be okay. She remarks that the minimum number for a dungeon is 4, so 1 more should be coming. The guard informs them that the last person has arrived and they're shocked to see the menacing Ketal, who cheerily asks if they're his party members. As the 3 are overwhelmed by his pressure, the guard tells them to talk among themselves and he'll be back in a while. Ketal introduces himself, so the others introduce themselves as well. Ketal asks Alessandro if he uses holy power since he's a paladin, but he hurriedly says he's a rather special kind of paladin. Hayes says she serves the god of lies and deceit, so Ketal asks if her identity is uncertain even as a cleric, and she nervously admits her god isn't that well regarded. Later, the guard says they should head out since everyone is ready. Later, they reach the dungeon entrance and the guard explains that it's a 3-floor dungeon with undead monsters, so they'll have to clear it and return with proof. Ketal asks what their plan is, so Cain says Ketal and the paladin will take the front lines and he'll check for traps while Hayes supports the fight from the rear with her various abilities. Ketal agrees, and as they head in, Hayes remarks that she can't see anything because of how dark it is, and Cain inwardly says it looks suspiciously normal since there aren't even any traps here. He tells them that the scattered bone fragments on the floor are skeletons, and if they get any closer, they'll rise and attack them. As he'd thought, the guard knew from the start, so this dungeon isn't just for verifying identities. From the beginning, it was just a tool to easily get rid of troublesome outsiders. He says skeletons are quite strong monsters and keep moving even if they're wounded or their limbs are cut off. And since they're wounded, their defense is considerable as well, so this dungeon's difficulty is higher than he'd thought. He tells Hayes to get her powers ready, and Alessandro to get his shield up and he'll aim for an opening during the fight. He explains that a skeleton's body moves even when damaged, so you have to aim for the neck, its weak spot, and they're pretty tough too, so you'll have to hit them multiple times. As a skeleton starts approaching him, the others brace themselves, but Ketal instantly kills it, shocking them. He smilingly sees that just like Cain said, they really do stop moving once you hit them in the neck, so Cain nervously laughs, remarking that that's not what he meant. Skeletons are creatures made of bone. A skeleton's bones are an extremely hard and foreign substance. Even for a skilled swordsman, cutting through the bone in a single strike is nearly impossible without using aura. Furthermore, the skeleton was strengthened by the dungeon's mana. The only way to defeat a skeleton is like felling a tree by repeatedly attacking its neck to sever its vertebrae, and to go beyond simply severing the neck bones and instead pulverize the skull is by all means impossible. Cain remarks that he knew Ketal was strong from the moment he saw him, but he never imagined he was this strong, so he wonders if he's really human. Ketal says they should keep going, so Hayes hurriedly agrees, and he says there's no need to rush this much. He suddenly stops in front of a skeleton, and as it starts rising, he asks if he can handle these skeletons by himself since there's something he wants to test out. They hurriedly agree and tell him to do as he pleases. He lets it rise so they wonder what he plans to do. Catal says this is fascinating and questions how this thing is put together. He effortlessly stops the skeleton's sword and asks what it's going to do about this. It tries to attack again, but Catal destroys its hand. It picks the sword up with the other hand, so he cheerily sees that it does know how to do that. Catal destroys the other hand too, and cheerily sees that it can even substitute parts, so it's quite intelligent while the others watch in shock. Catal sees that the skeleton can only move with its head and destroys it before apologizing to the others for the delay. Cain hurriedly tells him to take as much time as he needs, so he says they should depart once more, and they reach the second floor. Cain suggests that it'd be best if they take a brief rest, so Catal agrees that that would be for the best. As the others are sitting, he says he has something to ask regarding this dungeon, and admits it's embarrassing, but his learning on this matter is insufficient. However, Hayes hurriedly says a desire to learn is a virtue, and she's not terribly knowledgeable herself, but she asks what he's curious about. Catal says this dungeon is located closer to the territory and asks if there aren't any issues with the dungeon and the monsters within. Hayes says monsters generally don't leave their dungeons, but there are exceptions since cases like that have been identified and dealt with. Cain adds that dungeons are a natural phenomenon. Sometimes they appear as caves and other times as tower, and the majority of dungeons manifest near densely populated areas. Hayes explains that when a dungeon manifests, the local lord assesses the danger level and then outsiders like themselves, mercenaries or guards, are dispatched to clear it. Catal presumes that there's a reward for a successful conquest, so Hayes confirms this and says there is usually a boss on the final floor. You receive various rewards for defeating it, and for a dungeon of this size, the rewards should be quite substantial. Catal mutters that it's just like the game and says he was just talking to himself. He says he has one more thing he is curious about and asks who makes these dungeons. Surprised, Hayes says dungeons occur naturally and no one creates them, but Catal points out that there are too many oddities for that to be the case. First, they manipulate near-populated areas as if demanding to be explored, appearing near settlements and tempting people with pleasure, so for a natural phenomenon, it feels far too deliberate. Hayes admits he's right and remarks that it was such a given that she never even thought to question it. Cain inwardly admits he never considered it either, and never doubted it. It was simply the natural order, a truth of their world. He wonders if this barbarian is questioning that very truth. Barbarians are by all accounts an ignorant and savage people. Cruel beings, devoid of blood or tears. That much is true, but if everything he knows is correct, he wonders if this man is truly a barbarian. Catal asks if they've rested enough and suggests that they depart now, so they agree. As they're walking, they come across a treasure chest and Cain reveals that this is a treasure chest, one of the rewards of the maze, and one can have it, provided they can unlock it. He remarks that that's easy to say, but to unlock a chest of this quality, you'd need a master rogue with proven lockpicking skills, but a rogue of that caliber would have no business being in a dungeon like this. It's a shame, but he remarks that they'll have to abandon it. However, Catal asks Cain to unlock it since that's a chest and he's a thief, so it's his job. Cain inwardly admits that he's not wrong, but there's one problem. If he could actually do that, he wouldn't be in this situation. A bottom feeder like him, who isn't even acknowledged by the guild, has no business knowing how to pick locks, but he can't just tell Catal the truth, since the look on his face is really expectant, and if he's honest, it'll instantly turn to disappointment. He imagines a situation in his head, and cheerily says he'll give it a shot. As he starts working, Catal excitedly sees the equipment used for lockpicking, and Cain worryingly remarks that he's seeing right through him from behind. He hurriedly tells himself to remember the skills he saw while working as a porter, because he's risking his life. Cain tearfully says the chest has been opened, surprising Hayes, who cheerily says she heard only skilled thieves can unlock treasure chests, but to actually see it is truly amazing. Catal tells Cain he's impressive, and Cain wonders how this happened since it definitely seemed impossible, and wonders how this is possible since he succeeded by mere estimation. Cain, who had always prided himself on doing his best to live, begins to question his best in this moment for the first time in his life. He asks himself if he was really living his best life in the past before Catal asks how much value this has. Hayes says a regular family could live comfortably and with a luxurious lifestyle for a month with this. In that case, Catal asks Cain to take care of the rewards. As he picks up a gold goblet, Cain hurriedly gets scared when Catal addresses him. He asks if he needs help, but Cain hurriedly says he didn't do anything. As they continue walking, they come across 4 skeletons and get ready to fight it. Cain remarks that whenever he sees it, the sight of bones assembling always gives him chills. As the skeletons get up, Cain rushes forward and slashes at one, but it doesn't die, so Catal grabs 3 of them at once and says this is a rare spectacle, so they shouldn't interrupt while he handles them all. Alessandro blocks a strike from a skeleton before Cain rushes forward and attacks it. Hayes uses Shadow of Confusion on Alessandro, who rushes forward, cracking the skeleton's neck. Catal says it's really impressive to see a party's core skills in action firsthand and decides to enjoy the show since the obstacles have been cleared. The others remark that this barbarian is somehow testing them and menacingly tell themselves they'll die if they show weakness. After they've killed the skeleton, Catal remarks that there's no doubt that the ones who came to the snowfield must be strong after all. At the third floor, the number of skeletons increases, but with Catal leading the front, they were able to proceed without much difficulty and finally reach the deepest part of the dungeon. They approach a man sitting on a throne, and Hayes shockingly questions why something like a skeleton knight is here. Catal asks if this is different from the others they've faced, so she says it's quite strong, remarking that a skeleton knight is a skeleton wielding a long sword and shield freely. Unless it's a knight-level fighter, they have no chance of winning and is a monster they can't handle. Catal asks what happens if they can't clear this and decide to retreat, so she says a confirmation will be requested from the territory in that case, and if it's confirmed that it was a reasonable decision, it will most likely be proceeded without issue. Catal smiles and faces the skeleton knight, saying that's reasonable, as its eyes suddenly start glowing red. As the skeleton knight gets up, Catal sees that this is a skeleton that can maintain its form. The knight attacks them with its sword, so Hayes desperately tries to shield them, but it doesn't work, and the shield ends up breaking, so Alessandro protects them from the impact with his shield, and questions how a single blow can have this much power, admitting that he's just too strong. The knight rushes forward to attack them again, but Catal effortlessly kills it with a single punch, shocking everyone, and asks if that's all. He asks Cain if he can unlock the treasure chest, but he hurriedly says that's impossible since it has a high-level lock on it, and he doesn't have the skill to open it. Catal says that's a shame, and Cain mutters that they'll just have to leave it, but Catal instantly destroys it, leaving them shocked. He says the rewards are certainly better this way and tells Catal to take care of the rest, so he complies, remarking that being able to just smash a treasure chest open is unheard of, but if he could just break it, he wonders why Catal asked him to unlock it. After they leave the dungeon, the doors suddenly close and Cain explains that it disappears if you clear it perfectly, so it seems like there wasn't a secret room. Catal asks if those exist, so Cain says they do, but there's not many of them. Catal mutters that those sound fun too. The guard is shocked by how fast they were able to clear the dungeon and asks how it was, so Catal cheerily says it was very satisfying. In that case, the guard says he'll proceed with the entire procedure and tells them to follow him one by one. Hayes tells the guard that there didn't seem to be any major issues, so the guard asks if she thinks it's acceptable for the barbarian to stay in this domain. She says it should be fine, but the guard notices that she trails off vaguely when the barbarian is mentioned. He inwardly says the entire procedure isn't just about clearing a dungeon. The true purpose is to use the process to weed out any subversive elements. Cain says Catal doesn't seem the type to cause trouble, and the guard remarks that the barbarian possesses monstrous strength, but he didn't bring any harm to his party, so, as he'd thought, it seems Catal is very different from a typical barbarian. Catal tells him that Cain was excellent as a thief. He disarmed traps and even opened the lock on the treasure chest, and Alessandro was a reliable warrior on the front line as well. The same goes for Hayes, whose many prayers were a great aid in their battle. Surprised, the guard remarks that this is unusual since mostly when you force strangers into a party to clear a dungeon, there's no way they'd have good things to say for one another. He agrees to grant them all entry but tells them to be carefully since permission is granted, but if they cause trouble, they may be exiled. They agree, so he gives them the reward for the dungeon they cleared, suggesting that they divide it amongst themselves. He remarks that the guards often confiscate the dungeon clearing reward, but he doesn't feel like it this time. Catal thanks him and says they should divide this fairly, but they hurriedly say it's all right, so he can have it. Catal asks if they're not a party that work together and tells them to not refuse since the reward must be fairly shared. Next, he cheerily says they should go for a drink to celebrate and asks if they should find a pub around here. Surprised, they all nervously agree and tearfully remark that they just want him to let them go. As they enter the territory, the guard remarks that the barbarian is strong, monstrously so since he can fell a skeleton knight in a single blow. He believes Catal is at least knight level or higher, but he was clearly not a typical barbarian. He was the barbarian of legend, an alien existence. He tells the other guards he'll leave them on watch since he's going to go see the Lord, so they agree. The Lord of the Barkin domain in the Gehent Kingdom, Luke Barkin tells the guard to enter and asks what happened, so the guard reveals that a barbarian has appeared in the domain. Thank you for watching. Do you like this manga so far? We'll be back for another part very soon. Please like and subscribe to JockJut Manhwa for more amazing videos. Luke asks the guard if he gave Catal permission, so he nervously says he judged that it wouldn't be a major issue. Luke asks what the problem is if that's the case, so the guard says Catal is strong enough to be a problem and reveals that he took down a skeleton knight in a single blow. Luke reacts in shock and remarks that a skeleton knight is a monster that can't be handled unless you're at least knight level. Yet he defeated such a monster in a single blow. Barbarians were believed to be simple-minded, uneducated beings who try to resolve everything with brute force. He asks if Ketil is first-rate, so the guard admits that's most probably the case. Luke asks if there's a possibility of him being even stronger, so the guard says it can't be ruled out. Luke is stunned to hear that he's a warrior of that caliber, and he's a barbarian on top of it, so this is going to be a headache. He tells the guard to summon him for now. The guard asks if he'll be alright, so Luke says just having someone that strong roaming the territory is already a risk, and he'd feel better seeing it for himself. The guard warns him that it could be dangerous, so Luke says he has his own knight and asks the knight what he thinks. The knight says Ketil may be strong, but he's still just a barbarian, an ignorant brute with no intellect. Against his swordsmanship taught directly by a great swordmaster, he's no match at all. Luke pauses for a moment and orders the guard to summon the barbarian so he can speak with him himself. Meanwhile, Ketil and the others are cheating, and he cheerily says this is a great place because of the delicious food, and he also likes how quiet it is. Since he's treating, he tells them to help themselves as much as they want. He asks Alessandro if he's a paladin and questions what kind of holy power he uses since he didn't see him use any during the dungeon raid. Alessandro hurriedly says he's still in training, so his divine power hasn't awakened yet. Ketil says that's unfortunate and asks Hayes if she said her god's name is Colossia. He asks if there's a temple nearby, so she worryingly says she doesn't think so since he's not exactly a widely welcomed deity. The god of lies and deception, Colossia is a god shunned and rejected by the masses. She slowly asks Ketil how strong he really is, catching the others off guard. Ketil says he's not sure in terms of rank, and it hasn't been long since he left the Snowfield, so he's curious himself. He asks how strong a skeleton knight is, so Hayes says he needs to be at least second-rate to take one on. If he's first-rate, he could probably defeat one like he did. The waiter nervously informs them that their shop is about to close for the day. Ketil apologizes and they get up. When they leave, Ketil asks them if they all have plans or schedules coming up, so they hurriedly confirm that they do and that they're very busy. Ketil says that's unfortunate and says this is goodbye, so he'll see them again someday, and they inwardly hope they never meet again. As Ketil lies down on a bed, he smilingly says this is nice and wonders if this is the first time he's laid down on a bed since he came here. He's glad he could stay at an inn thanks to the dungeon rewards without much trouble, and acknowledges that this is paradise compared to the Snowfield. It took him a long time from the day he opened his eyes in the Snowfield to finally reach civilization, so he wonders what he should do now since he wants to experience and feel more. He says he wants to go on an adventure and thinks about the Elven sanctuary, the magic tower, and even the royal capital as he falls asleep. The next morning, Ketil wakes up when he hears someone knocking on the door to his room and opens it to see the guard, who asks if he woke him up. Ketil recognizes him as the captain of the guards and asks what's happened, so guard reveals that the Lord wants to see Ketil in person. Ketil is surprised to her that such a person wants to meet him and agrees. He asks if he should head out now and says the can leave once he gets his clothes, so the guard is surprised by how easily he agreed. As they're walking, Ketil remarks that when he first entered the territory, it was that nighttime, so he only got a rough look, but now, seeing it in the daytime, this is surprisingly interesting. He cheerily gives the guard a thumbs up, remarking that if this what you call a lucky fantasy, then he'll gladly take it every time. The guard wonders what he's doing, and inwardly says he should block the line of sight as much as he can since there's not much time left. He brings Ketil in front of Luke and says he's brought the barbarian, so Luke tells them to come in and offers Ketil his hand, saying he's pleased to meet him and introducing himself. Ketil introduces himself as well and bows his head, shocking Luke, who remarks that barbarians never bow their heads. To them, strength is everything, but it looks like living long enough lets you see it all. He clears his throat and asks Ketil to take a seat, seeing that he's learned manners. Ketil sits down in front of him and sees that this is what a lord's castle looks like. Even in a fantasy world, castles are medieval-like. He suddenly notices a knight guarding the lord and inwardly admits he never thought he'd see one, remembering how he used to play knight games a lot as a kid. He stares at the knight in awe, but the guy suddenly senses a killing intent and is shocked to see that Ketil can reveal such bloodlust in the lord's presence. He grabs his sword and inwardly tells Ketil that he won't leave here alive. However, Luke tells Ketil that the reason he called him is simple. There are a few things he wants to verify. Ketil asks what he wants to know, so he asks where he came from. Ketil sees that that's quite an important question to him and reveals that he comes from the coldest place in the world, a world covered in white. Luke realizes he's from the White Snowfield and really is the barbarian of legend. He's stunned by the fact that that kind of being is sitting in front of him and says he speaks things hard to believe. Ketil says it was a miserable place, and whether they believe it or not is their choice. In that case, Luke decides to rephrase his question and asks Ketal how strong he is, remarking that what matters is how dangerous his power is. Ketal says that's the wrong question, since he doesn't know the level of strength in this land. Luke glances towards his knight and suggests about a spar with him, saying he'll make sure he's rewarded for it. He assures Ketal it's not a fight to the death and trusts he'll keep it within reason, so Ketal smilingly says that sounds good to him. He remarks that this is not just any knight, he's a fantasy knight who wields mystical power and aura. A chance to see such a being's technique up close is going to be exciting. Luke inwardly says a barbarian is a barbarian after all, and no matter how polite they act, they can't hide their savage love of battle. As Ketal and Luke face off against each other, Luke announces that they will begin and says no blood is going to be shed. The knight tells Ketal to consider it an honor to witness his swordsmanship. Ketal smilingly says he'd prefer that too, but this ticks the knight off, who inwardly questions how he dares to act so relaxed and remarks that he'll show him the overwhelming difference in their strength. He rushes towards Ketal and wonders what he will do now. As he attacks, Ketal surprisingly sees that the knight is attacking with 3 swords simultaneously. As Ketal is dodging, he sees that this isn't an illusion and all 3 swords are real, so he wonders if this is swordsmanship. The knight grins and remarks that dodging his swordsmanship by a hair's breadth is all Ketal can manage, but admits even that is impressive. However, there's no need to watch anymore. Ketal effortlessly breaks the sword, shocking the knight, who wonders what just happened before Ketal grabs him and throws him away, breaking his armor's chest piece. Luke reacts with shock as the knight is slammed into the wall. He shockingly sees that a first-class knight was defeated with just a single strike and wonders what overwhelming power this is. Ketal asks Luke if this is over, so Luke admits that it is. He later remarks that a barbarian who fells a first-class knight with a single blow has monstrous strength, at least superhuman level. He inwardly admits a barbarian with this much strength could very well tip the balance of the world, so it might be time to inform him, one of the few people in the vast world who bears the title of swordmaster. Luke says he should have arrived by now and wonders aloud if he will take an interest. An old man suddenly enters and asks if he means his interest, so Luke mutters that his taste in hobbies remains as questionable as ever. The man, Swordmaster Cain, says you need some entertainment in life and suggests that he tell him about the so-called interesting matter. Luke says it's an honor to have him visit on such short notice and formally greets him. As the knight is lying on the bed, Luke enters and asks if his body is feeling better, so he hurriedly says it should be fine after a few days and apologizes to him. Cain says he should be apologizing to him since his foolish disciple lost to an unknown barbarian. The knight is surprised to see him, and Cain notices that there isn't a single wound on his chest. He inwardly says he saw his armor completely destroyed before coming here, so judging by its state, it wouldn't have been strange if he had died. However, aside from a few torn clothes, his body is completely unscathed, so he wonders if the barbarian showed restraint. Cain sees that he's not just a mindless barbarian, since he can control his strength and with incredible precision at that, and to have shown that kind of restraint means he far surpasses the level of a knight, so he's superhuman level at minimum. Luke asks how strong he is compared to Ketal, so Cain says Ketal may be strong but he's a swordmaster, so even if he can wield superhuman strength he can't reach him. However, he points out that Ketal didn't seem to use aura, yet he could wield such power, which is impossible with ordinary methods. He wonders if this is the power of a barbarian from the White Snowfield, and Luke remarks he didn't believe it at first, but it seems it's true that Ketal came from the White Snowfield. Cain remembers what barbarians are and questions if Ketal is really a human or a heteromorph. However, he mutters that that can't be it, since if he was a heteromorph, he wouldn't show consideration for humans, so this must be his own misjudgment. He wonders why Ketal came from the White Snowfields of all places now. Luke asks if something's wrong, but Cain says it's a matter for later and remembers how the Emperor always has to ask for the strangest of things. He says it's not something to worry about now, and questions if the barbarian is still in the territory, so Luke believes he is since he said he would stay, so Cain believes he should confirm it himself. The guard asks Ketal what he plans to do now, so he thinks about it for a moment. A while ago, Luke had given Ketal his gold coin reward for the duel, and confirmed that he won't interfere with his duties in the territory. Presently, Ketal says he hasn't decided on anything specific, but it would be nice to have an officially recognized identity. Every time he goes to a new territory, entering dungeons would become an issue. If that's what he's after, the guard says there's a way, since he can have someone of high status become his sponsor and vouch for his identity, or he could become a mercenary. He explains that if Ketal builds up achievements as a mercenary and gets recognized by the guild, his identity can be acknowledged. However, he remarks that unless you reach a certain level, mercenaries are treated as mere errand boys, so with the level of strength Ketal has, getting a sponsor would be the most proper. Ketil is surprised to hear that there's a way to become a mercenary, and remarks that they're people who take on requests and slay monsters, the very essence of fantasy romance. He asks where he needs to go to become a mercenary. The guard says there's a guild hall, so Ketil cheerily asks him to lead the way. Mercenaries are drifters who roam the world and take on requests. Some people view them as the embodiment of romantic ideals, but in truth, mercenaries are the lowest rung for those without an official status. Even those with some strength often die in unexplored dungeons, and more often than not, they become scapegoats for all kinds of dirty work, which is why the bottom tier of mercenary society is crude, filthy, and noisy. As a pair of men are fighting in the guild hall, the receptionist asks Rosa how the new recruits are today, so she wearily sighs and says they're hopeless since they're all just weirdos. Some nutjob claiming to be a holy knight and even a thief, the nun seems okay, but because of who she worships, no one really trusts her. The receptionist says that's a shame, as Rosa remarks that no decent people are showing up and these dumb mercenaries are always picking fights. She wonders when a cool and handsome prince riding on a white horse will appear and free her from this reception desk. Ketil enters and sees that this is the guild hall. The men quickly stop fighting when they realize a barbarian is here. Ketil approaches the front desk and says he's here because he wants to become a mercenary. Rosa nervously asks what his purpose is in becoming one, so Ketil says there are various reasons, but he heard that by working as a mercenary, he can get the official status. Rosa says that's correct, but to be recognized as a mercenary, he'll need a considerable number of achievements, so she asks if that will be okay. Ketil says that's fine, so Rosa asks for his name and age and says she'll register him as a mercenary for 5 silver coins. Ketil gives his name but says he's not sure about his age, so she says she'll just enter something approximate and confirms that his registration has been completed before giving him his mercenary badge, which symbolizes his status. Ketil smilingly sees that he's been enlisted and asks what kind of requests are available since he'd like to start immediately. Rosa shows Ketil the requests he can accept currently. He sees that the requests are at rank F and asks if this is all there is since the requests are herb gathering, basement cleaning, sewer cleanup, street cleaning, and night patrol. Rosa says these are the only available requests right now since he's currently at F-rank mercenary and remarks that barbarians are known for their pride, so she inwardly questions if he'll suddenly lash out, considering whether or not she should call someone. She says if he completes simple tasks and builds a record, he'll eventually be able to take on more difficult ones. In that case, Ketil says he'll accept the herb gathering request. Rosa asks if she's sure, so he asks if that isn't something that needs to be done and says there's no problem. He asks where he can find the herbs, so she says he'll need to go outside the village and shows him what the herbs look like. Ketil agrees and says he'll be back shortly, hearing which she wonders why Ketil is so chill. Later in the woods, Ketil questions if these herbs are for treating wounds and says they look pretty strange, so he takes off his cloak and says he'll begin his first mission as a secretary since he's got his UV protection gear. About 1 hour later, at the Mercenary Guild Hall, Rosa is shocked to see how many herbs Ketil brought back and wonders if he's some kind of mastermind who's here to destroy the herb field. However, she surprisingly sees that the herbs are in great condition, even though most mercenaries just rip them up carelessly, so the stems usually break off. Ketil blushingly says, despite how he looks, he's actually quite confident in his delicate touch. She thanks him for his hard work and gives him his reward for the request, 1 silver coin. It's barely enough to buy the cheapest meal, but the first money Ketil earned honestly through his hard work is quite touching. He says he's very satisfied and asks if he can take another quest right away, surprising Rosa, who remarks that he couldn't possibly be happy with this kind of reward. Since the sun is still high, Ketil says he wants to work as much as he can, seeing which she remarks that this new mercenary is quite weird too. After doing basement cleaning and sewer maintenance, Ketil decides to pick up warehouse cleaning next, seeing which Rosa wonders if this barbarian likes cleaning and agrees. Ketil arrives to clean the warehouse and asks the shocked woman if she's the owner of the warehouse, so she hurriedly confirms that she is. Cleaning the warehouse was simple. Moving the items inside posed no real issue, and the next request was street sweeping, so he grabbed a broom and swept the ground. At first it was hard to control his strength, but he managed without major problems. Watching Ketil from afar, Cain wonders why he's doing that, remarking that he's at least superhuman level for sure and has enough power to affect an entire kingdom if he wanted to. In other words, if he just revealed his strength, he'd be welcomed anywhere he went, and yet, this barbarian who tries to solve everything with force is doing these trivial chores. On top of that, it doesn't even look like Ketil is half-assing it since he looks really serious about it. He wonders just why he's doing this. As Ketil gets up from bed, he sees a pouch on his bedside and remembers how Rosa told him that on his first day as a mercenary, he completed all 15 requests. She said that will be 15 silver coins, so he cheerily thanked her and said he'll be back again tomorrow. As he gets up, he mutters that it's time to begin his second day in civilization. As he's walking, he suddenly notices a library, so he heads in and asks the receptionist if he can read some books as she gets terrified of him. As Ketil is reading, Cain can't believe the so-called savage and ignorant barbarian is reading a book. He questions if Snowfield barbarians are somehow more cultured than regular ones, or maybe this particular barbarian is just special. Ketil sets the book down and sees that the Empire won in the end, remarking that a few years ago, Milena came to the Snowfield saying she was heading to the kingdom at war with the Empire to sell weapons, so it looks like the result of that war was the Empire's victory. Next, he reads about the different races in this world, and suddenly sees that there are more places like the White Snowfield. He wonders just how big this world is and thanks the librarian since this was really informative. He then heads to the guild hall and asks Rosa if there are any requests today, seeing which Cain mutters that it looks like he'll have to meet Ketil in person. Ketil smilingly remarks that he completed over a dozen more requests today, and even small jobs line up nicely, so this is pretty profitable, so if he keeps up this pace, the day he's recognized as a true mercenary will come soon. He runs into Cain and says he knows Cain's been following him around, shocking him. Ketil asks what business he has with him, as Cain remarks that he clearly hid his presence using aura, and no matter how sharp someone's instincts are, it should be impossible to sense him. Ketil asks if he's a bandit and is surprised to see there are bandits even in a place with decent security. Cain wonders if he'd believe him if he said he's a swordmaster before Ketil asks if he really needs to turn to robbery at this age. He realizes bringing him in would be a good achievement for him, surprising Cain, who realizes this might actually be a good opportunity since Ketil is mistaking him for a bandit. He remarks that confronting Ketil directly and learning his strength and identity could be a way to go. However, Ketil suddenly disappears and appears right in front of him. Cain realizes Ketil will grab the base of his neck if he stays here like this and hurriedly dodges, so Ketil smilingly says he's pretty fast. Cain shockingly remarks that Ketil almost caught him, and if his reflexes had been just a little slower he would have been caught, but what's even more shocking is that he couldn't sense any aura flowing from Ketil at all. He realizes this isn't a test anymore and rushes forward to go all out. However, Ketil appears behind him and grabs his hand. Cain remarks that he clearly extended his senses and yet he couldn't react. Ketil twists his arm and Cain says this isn't just the sensation of being grabbed. It's like his arm is lodged into a boulder and his whole body is being forcibly dragged along. As he's struggling, he inwardly questions what kind of strength this is and realizes he can't compete in a power struggle. In that case, he decides to go all out and releases his power. Cain releases a small explosion and manages to swiftly get away from Ketil, who sees that bandits these days sure have tricks up their sleeves. Cain remarks that a normal human body should have been torn apart the moment the explosion touched it, but Ketil doesn't even have a single scratch. He gets ready to brandish his sword, but Ketil effortlessly stops him from taking it out with one finger. Shocked, Cain struggles for a bit and depressingly realizes this is the end for him. Ketil carries an unconscious Cain on his shoulder and sees that this is what a bandit in a fantasy world looks like. Thank you for watching. Do you like this manga so far? We'll be back for another part very soon. Please like and subscribe to JockJut Manhwa for more amazing videos. Stunned, the guard wonders what on earth is going on and questions why Swordmaster Cain is here. He wonders if the barbarian attacked Cain and what's going to happen now. Ketil says he found a thief, shocking him, and asks if this will count as mercenary work if he hands him over to the guards. The guard remarks that Swordmaster Cain is a man who has reached the heights of superhuman strength and is being held by a barbarian in such a humiliating position. He mutters that Cain is not a thief, so Ketil sees that he must be an accomplice to the criminal. The guard bows to greet Cain and says he's the only swordmaster of the Gehentria kingdom. Surprised, Ketil says that's impossible since Cain is a thief who attacked him for his silver coins. The guard confirms that he really is the swordmaster and there's no way he'd mistake that face. Ketil suggests that he might be a sorcerer disguising his face, but the guard points out that if he was that high level of a mage, he'd already be respected as a swordmaster. Ketil asks if swordmaster could just be some sort of nickname thieves use, but the guard questions what he's even saying. Ketil asks if he's really a swordmaster, so the guard once again confirms this and nervously mutters that he'll report this to the Lord first. Luke is shocked to hear that Cain was defeated, and Ketil apologetically admits to Cain that he should have listened to his full story. However, Cain admits it's also his fault for not saying anything, shocking Luke, who wonders what on earth this situation is since he had anticipated that Cain would seek out the barbarian for a duel, but he never expected him to lose. In other words, Ketil is stronger than a sword master. Of course, there are different levels even among the superhuman. Cain only recently became a sword master, so his level must be the lowest among the superhumans. Still, he bears the great title of swordmaster, so for a barbarian to defeat him means he's a completely uncontrollable human being. Luke says he'll excuse himself since it seems there's been some misunderstanding and it looks like they need to have a private conversation first. Cain remarks that this is utterly humiliating, but it was such a perfect defeat that he can't even make excuses. His pride wasn't just wounded, it was torn apart like a rag. Cain properly introduces himself, so Ketal asks if his last name is Swordmaster. Cain explains that once one reaches the realm of Swordmaster, one's surname loses all meaning. Ketal asks if what Cain showed him earlier was a Swordmaster's technique. Cain shows it to him, so Ketal watches in awe, remarking that he thought it was just a thief's technique at first and didn't care for it, but knowing it's a Swordmaster's skill makes it quite fascinating. He says this is the manifestation of the mystic and is also called aura. Ketal asks if that thing back then was aura, and questions how he can use that as well. He tells Ketal that he basically has to control the mystic and manifest it. He explains that the mystic refers to mystic energy itself. When used as aura, it becomes the realm of swordsmen, and when used as mana, it belongs to mages. Ketal sees that both mages and swordsmen can use it and asks Cain if he can teach him that technique. He embarrassingly admits he's still in the process of expanding his insufficient knowledge and asks Cain to teach him. Cain asks if there's any reason he would call him for guidance when he's stronger than him, so Ketal says he doesn't know anything about the mystic or swordsmanship, he just swings wildly without knowledge. Cain inwardly says although he was defeated, he didn't even draw his sword, so he'll teach Ketal the way of the sword and show him the greatness of swordsmanship to restore his shattered pride. Ketal understands that he looked so good because he didn't use his sword, so Cain hurriedly says that's exactly it. Ketal admits he did think it was odd that he's called a swordmaster with that level of strength. Ketal agrees that he would have won if he had used his sword, so Cain wonders if that's really the case. Before the regression, Ketal had learnt swordsmanship himself, but this is true, fantasy swordsmanship that wields the mysterious power of aura. Cain tells Ketal that the most distinct trait of his swordsmanship is the materialization of illusion and reality. He asks Ketal what he saw when he fought his disciple, so Ketal recounts how the sword strike split into 3 parts, and all of them were real attacks. Cain says swordsmanship is the art of combining the sword and aura to wield the mystical power, and the one who reaches the end of that path is called a swordmaster. He shows Ketal aura and inwardly admits he can't believe he's actually teaching swordsmanship to a barbarian. He slashes in the air, and Ketal is surprised to see that his strike has split into 5 parts. Cain explains that there are many techniques that create illusions using aura, but only his swordsmanship allows them to take physical form. Ketal says he thinks he can do that technique too, surprising Cain, who asks what kind of nonsense that is, remarking that he's dedicated his whole life to the sword along with his natural talent, and he's endured bone-crushing effort, which is how he barely reached this level of swordsmanship, so there's no way someone could copy it just by seeing it once. Ketal says it'll be faster if he just shows him, and Cain is stunned to see that he's using an axe. Ketal unexpectedly performs a sword strike with his axe and swiftly gets it in one try. Shocked, Cain remarks that it definitely looked like an illusion and reality struck at the same time, but it only looked that way because of his overwhelming power and speed, although even he got almost fooled by it. He tells Ketal that he just swung an axe and there was no technique in it. Ketal says the result is similar and asks if it matters. Cain inwardly admits he's not wrong, but it still hurts his pride. Cain suddenly performs a technique and makes illusions of himself, surprising Ketal. He explains that this is a separation of the body achieved through ultimate control of aura. He asks Ketal if he can replicate it, so Ketal steps forward, but when he tries doing it, he ends up creating a huge tornado, shocking Cain since the swordsmanship he built up his whole life was just replicated so quickly. He tearfully admits this is unbelievable, seeing which Ketal says his mental fortitude is weaker than expected. He tells Cain his swordsmanship is amazing while he merely swung his axe quickly, which isn't real swordsmanship. He admits he can never reach Cain's level of mastery, so Cain hurriedly tells himself his swordsmanship still holds great value, and materializing illusion itself is a technique only he can do in this world. He says this isn't a flaw in his technique, that Barbarian is just insane. Ketal asks Cain if he can teach him true swordsmanship techniques, so Cain apologizes for getting emotional for a moment and clears his throat. He explains that to use true techniques, you must first know how to control aura. But to control aura, you must first awaken to the concept of mystery. No wizard, swordsman, or witch can reach a higher realm without awakening to mystery. Only those who believe in gods can achieve that. He says mystery refers to the mysterious power one possesses within. How you can control it determines everything. There are 5 stages to it. The most basic stage is sensing mystery. It's the stage of knowing, awakening to, and feeling mystery. He says those who can sense mystery are called third-rate. Depending on your ability to control mystery, you're assigned one of 5 ranks which are commonly known as third-rate, second-rate, first-rate, superhuman, and hero. He says it's just a convenient way to classify things and just understanding the concept is enough. Ketil says he understands, so Cain says they should begin with the first stage, sensing mystery. Cain explains that sensing the mystical means awakening a new sense you've never felt, means expanding your senses as much as possible. Ketil mutters that he can't feel anything, so Cain says he thought someone as strong as him would easily be able to sense it. He remarks that it's not a hard rule, but those who are strong even without mana tend to have a higher chance of sensing the mystical, but this barbarian seems to be exception. Ketil admits no one around him has ever sensed this thing, so Cain says sensing it isn't easy at first, so this time, he'll send his energy into him and open the path to the mystical. Ketil hurriedly tells him to go ahead, so he tells him to relax his entire body and focus his senses on his physical self. However, he hurriedly wonders if this is really a human body since it feels like solid rock. He mutters that his mind wandered for a moment and starts to send aura, remarking that what matters is awakening the mystical power that lies dormant inside the body, so soon he'll find the path. However, he realizes he can't find the path to the mystical power inside his body, or can't reach it. No matter how far he extends his aura, he can't reach or see anything, so it feels like moving through a space so pressurized it might crush him to death. He tells Ketil it's not going to work, so Ketil asks if he's saying he has no talent. However, Cain explains that simply sending aura into his body isn't enough, so in the end, to find the mystical power, Ketil must discover the path within his self and awaken the dormant force. He tells Ketil his body is different. To find the path, the aura must flow deep into the body, but his body is deep and heavy, and it couldn't even reach properly inside his body. Ketil is surprised to see that even a swordmaster can't do it, so Cain says it's hard to say that definitely, and he couldn't confirm anything. He couldn't even tell whether the path to the mystical exists or not, so he might want to seek out other swordmasters who are more skilled with aura or go to the magic power. Ketil says he appreciates this since he learned a lot thanks to Cain. Cain remarks that the barbarians he's met so far couldn't be controlled. They lived for plunder, and all they desired was alcohol and violence, which is why barbarians were outcasts to all, but this one is different. Cain suggests that he should consider settling in this kingdom. He explains that he means pledging loyalty to the kingdom and receiving a title since he'll receive a high-rank position with his strength. Cain offers to act as his sponsor, so Ketil admits that does sound interesting but refuses since he has no intention of belonging to anything. Cain inwardly says if he could bring this barbarian under the royal palace's hand, perhaps they could even break free from the empire's rule. He asks Ketil if he doesn't find the fact that he could gain noble status tempting, but he says he will enjoy his own pleasures and tells Cain he won't forget this favor. As Cain is walking, he admits that was a ridiculous thought since he thought for a moment he could control Ketil, but no one can. He acts solely by his own wills and may fit in a group, but that's all. Inside, there is only his own will. He can't tell what he's thinking. So in some ways, Ketil might be more troublesome than other barbarians, a being of the demon realm. Luke learns that His Majesty, the Emperor, wants to send an expedition to the demon realm. Cain says lives are being lost in vain under the excuse of reconnaissance, and mutters that they haven't even conquered all of human territory yet. Luke sees that the time will come eventually, so Cain confirms this and says since this is also Imperial land, a summons could arrive. He wearily mutters that this is all a big headache and reveals that the movements of demons are starting to become noticeable one by one, shocking Luke. He adds that the frequency of dungeon appearances is also unusual, and there are rumors that the distortion of the demon realm is leaking outside. Something is happening, and it's clearly not in humanity's favor. He admits it's strange that the barbarian is already here, and Luke says he doesn't know what he thinks, but Ketil hasn't been hostile towards them at the very least, although he can't say anything beyond that. Ketil notices that people are freaking out and being scared because of his clothes, and it could be because this doesn't count as civilized attire. He decides to buy some civilized clothes and heads to a store where the employee nervously says they don't have anything his size. Ketil asks Fi there's no way, so the guy reveals that they could make something custom for him if he gives them some time. Ketil cheerily asks him to do that, so the man wonders if he will survive the moment if Ketil ends up not liking the finished clothes. On the road to the guild hall, Ketil sees a gem lying on the road and wonders what it is, so he pockets it and decides to ask about it at the guild hall. At the guild, he asks Rosa what it is since he picked it up on the way here. He says it really doesn't look like an ordinary bead, so she decides to take a look and says it doesn't seem like a gem, and judging by the smooth surface, someone probably crafted it. She says it's quite valuable looking, at least on the surface, but Ketil quickly snaps his fingers and asks if she's alright since it looked like her mind was being drawn into the orb. She says this orb is very hard to identify, and it kind of feels like it has some strange energy, so she asks if she should try appraising it for him. Ketil thanks her but says he'll look into it himself since that's part of the fun too. More importantly, he asks what requests are available today, so she shows him the request forms. Later, Ketal lies down and seriously wonders what this thing is since Rosa looked like she was entranced by it. He suddenly hears a voice from the orb telling him to come to it. He wonders if this is telling him to go to some storage place and sees that it's even kindly transmitting directions straight into his head, so it might be some kind of domination magic. Ketal wonders if he should go and tells the marble to shut up since he's already on his way. He reaches the place the marble was calling out to him from and asks where the person who called him is. The voice says another sacrifice has entered, and this time it's a dumb barbarian, so judging by his size, he should be a decent offering. It says there's only a little bit of time left until resurrection. The past, a time of chaos when many kingdoms were destroyed, behind it all was a wicked sorcerer who manipulated and disturbed emotions. He controlled the minds of countless kings, started wars and ruled over kingdoms, but his excessive wickedness was eventually exposed, and he was hunted down by heroes. However, just before being defeated, he had already transferred his soul into a life vessel, allowing him to become a lich, an immortal being whose soul resides in a life vessel, undying until it is destroyed. Thus, the evil sorcerer who once conquered the world became a lich and began plotting his resurrection, and since the resurrection required a significant amount of life force, he settled near a remote state and scattered enchanting orbs, gathering sacrifices one by one. The orbs acted as mana cores, essential for resurrection, and with this great power, he planned to conquer the world once more. That goal was steadily nearing success, but the sorcerer wonders why a barbarian is here. He says this is quite a remote domain, and he chose it because he quietly needed to regain his strength in a secluded place untouched by the public eye, which is why a barbarian's presence here feels quite unnatural. He says creatures from the north have come quite far, so Ketal will be an excellent sacrifice judging by his size. He placed a special effect on the orb to make it so it only mesmerizes those who have not awakened to the mysteries. Therefore, anyone who ends up here by the orb doesn't understand the mysteries, so in the end, this barbarian is just an ordinary one who knows nothing of the mysteries, so the fact that he doesn't seem mesmerized must be an illusion. He orders Ketal to come and become the cornerstone for his glorious resurrection. Ketal reaches the place and walks through the door to see the sorcerer in front of him. He's surprised to see that it's a real lich, the ultimate state that a peak sorcerer can reach, a being that always shows up in fantasy stories as a villain. He admits he never thought he'd get to see one as the lich is stunned to see that Ketal wasn't mesmerized by the orb. Ketal realizes how the lich has been luring people here, so it confusingly remarks that he doesn't sense any mystery from him, which means he's just an ordinary barbarian. He says Ketal must be carrying some kind of mind protection artifact, remarking that it's to the point where he can't even sense it. He doesn't know how a barbarian could possess something like that, but it seems like he got lucky and picked one up somewhere. However, Ketal says he doesn't have anything like that, so the lich questions if he thinks he can fool him and says he could have died without pain if he had obediently fallen under his spell, but now he'll have to crush him with force. He awakens skeletons and they rush forward to attack Ketal, who sees that this is a dungeon where an evil lich hides and says he more or less gets what's going on here. He instantly destroys the skeleton that tried to attack him and tells the lich he's shallower than he'd thought. The lich mutters that they'll see if his tongue still works after his limbs are cut off and makes other skeletons rise up as well, declaring that Ketal being alive is all that matters. He orders the skeletons to cut him down, but Ketal once again easily kills them all, shocking the lich. Ketal mutters that as expected, just like Cain said, if the skeletons lose their head, they die. He admits he'd thought the lich would at least command death knights or undead, but he's only using skeletons. Stunned, the lich angrily says he's entertained him long enough and orders a skeleton knight to rise, seeing which Ketal wonders if its settings will be different since it's being controlled by a lich right now. The lich orders the skeleton knight to kill Ketal, so he smilingly says he's curious to see just how durable it is and smashes it into the wall. However, the knight wildly gets up and charges forward, so Ketal acknowledges that it's sturdier than he'd thought. The lich orders the knight to release its mana to the limit, so it charges towards Ketal. Ketal remarks that a skeleton knight created by a lich is quite unusual and punches it in its face, shocking the lich. Ketal says it's unusual, but it doesn't seem all that different, so he asks if that's all. The lich slowly asks who he is, remarking that he doesn't sense any mystery or magic from this barbarian. If he used an artifact, he would at least be able to sense some mana, but he doesn't feel that either, so he wonders if it could purely be his own power. He questions how Ketal could have defeated a skeleton knight just his physical strength and wonders if that's even possible. He admits Ketal is special and decides to face him himself, so he tells him to consider this an honor. Ketal watches in awe as he gets surrounded by darkness, so the lich asks if he's afraid and tells he to fear him. He declares that Ketal will pay the price for invading his sanctuary, but Ketal mutters that he only came here because the orb called to him and asks the lich if he wasn't the one who scattered the orb. The lich inwardly admits everyone who came to this place was drawn in by the orb he scattered, and the same was true for the barbarian. He hurriedly tells Kital to shut up because he is the great and might mage, the one who destroyed 5 kingdoms and fought heroes. Kartos Breniulus Kesses. Kital wonders if having names longer than 2 lines is a trend in this world, as Kartos orders him to become the foundation of his resurrection. He slowly starts hypnotizing Kital, and it's explained that magic that controls human emotions brings forth negative emotions, trapping the victim in them until they can do nothing, leaving their mind completely broken. This is a unique magic created by Kartos and is incredibly powerful compared to the mana it consumes. He remarks that a mere barbarian who can't even wield arcane power is utterly powerless before true magic. So he wonders what he should do next, since there's something different about this barbarian, and he doesn't seem to be wearing any special artifact either. He decides to take Kital with him and study him, so he orders the skeletons to drag him away, but Kital unexpectedly destroys the skeleton's head, shocking Kartos. He hurriedly says that mind control spell should have worked perfectly, but Kital mutters that he just stood there watching and asks if he was planning to capture him with skeletons again like before. Even if a human is powerful, deep in their hearts, negative emotions are bound to exist, which is why there's no way to avoid magic that controls emotions. He mutters that he doesn't know why Kital is still standing just fine and starts gathering aura, declaring that it will swallow the world and cast confusion upon the unseen. Kital watches in awe as the massive wave gets bigger and slowly approaches him. Kartos starts manically laughing and declares that he has won, but he inwardly admits he used up everything except the mana needed to keep his body standing. His jaw drops in shock when he realizes Kital is still standing and questions how even this didn't work when he used the most powerful magic among all mind control spells. He wonders just who the hell he is, as Kital says that was impressive, but he didn't feel anything from it, so if that was Kartos's best shot, it's his turn now. Thank you for watching. Do you like this manhwa so far? We'll be back for another part very soon. Please like and subscribe to JockJut Manhwa for more amazing videos. The demon girl conjures a powerful blast, seeing which the guard hurriedly tells everyone to run away. However, they realize they've been caged by a barrier and desperately try to open it. The girl says this entire village is her territory and no one can escape because they're all her prey. Hearing this, the mercenaries question how there can be a demon. Terrified, Hayes confirms that the girl is a demon and begs Lord Kolosha to save her, but Kital comfortingly tells her to calm down and says he's right here with her. He wonders what it means for a demon to have a name, so she explains that not all beings called demons in this world are strong. They're called demons for convenience, but in reality, most are just fragments of evil and magic. However, there are beings you can truly call demons and born in the cradle of darkness without a mother. Beings who name themselves by their own will are called true demons. Even the weakest named demon has enough power to shake a kingdom. Kettle asks if this demon is one of the named ones, so Hayes affirms that and says judging by the horns, the girl is a Shetiar, a demon that appeared hundreds of years ago. She questions why something like that would appear in a remote land like this, so Kettle asks if they can't break the barrier. Hayes declines and says this place is already the demon's domain, so unless they defeat the demon, there's no way to lift the barrier. When Kettle touches the barrier, he's surprised to see that it's cracking and decides to just watch a bit longer as he tries to hide it. Ashetiar smilingly asks if this prank wasn't fun and if it made Aquaz eager to investigate. Aquaz realizes there were traces of life, as if people had just been there in a vanished village because of the demon's trick and to just toy with people. Summoning a named demon requires a significant sacrifice. An entire village's population wouldn't nearly be enough, and for the territory to have transformed without anyone noticing is impossible, so he wonders how Ashetiar descended into this world. Ashetiar questions if he really thinks she'd tell him, so Aquaz angrily calls her a filthy evil defiling this land. Ashetiar laughs and asks Aquaz if he thinks his god can save him. She tells him to listen carefully and reveals that cracks are forming in this world, so it no longer belongs only to humans. A long time ago, gods and humans clashed with evil. The result was victory for gods and humans. The defeated evil was cast out from the world. Ashetiar says she's been waiting for this day from the wretched hell and declares that she is Ashetiar, the demon of gravity who will wash away the shame of the past and cover this world in evil. Aquaz angrily calls her a disgusting creature and declares that this world belongs only to the gods and humans, so she should return where she came from. He makes the god's power descend upon him, surprising Kettle, who watches in awe and sees that you can't attack while transforming. Aquaz conjures armor, a shield, and a spear, so Ashetiar admits that's interesting and summons a hammer before calling Aquaz God's dog. Aquaz rushes forward and they clash, causing a huge explosion. Ashetiar smiles and says a battle should have dignity, asking if hunting dogs don't know that. However, Aquaz angrily asks if she's done talking. Aquaz and Ashetiar are fighting before Ashetiar starts pushing back against Aquaz. Aquaz struggles to push back against her and declares that the light of brilliance cannot be violated by anyone before throwing Ashetiar back. Ashetiar is surprised to see that he can read scripture at that age. Aquaz reads another verse. That divine light burned all wicked things. He rushes forward to attack and starts fighting Ashetiar as the other mercenaries hurriedly try to shield themselves. Katal smilingly says they're magnificent, and Hayes asks if he can't help Aquaz. Katal says it would be possible but asks why he should interfere and ruin the fight. He says he'd obviously like to fight the demon too, but he wants to watch this battle right now, hearing which Hayes remarks that this isn't right. As Aquaz and Ashetiar continue fighting, she annoyingly remarks that he is God's hunting dog after all, but she still has the upper hand in power. Aquaz unexpectedly starts overwhelming Ashetiar, remarking that the compatibility isn't good, but in this world, beings of evil cannot oppose God. Ashetiar sees that the battle will go on for quite long at this rate and decides to use a method to gain the advantage. As she rushes forward to attack, Aquaz is stunned to see what direction she's running in and realizes she intends to kill the mercenaries. He hurriedly blocks her attack and starts getting overwhelmed, but he calls Ashetiar a filthy thing. Ashetiar questions if he really expected fairness from a demon, so Aquaz recites Material Chapter 1, Verse 1. Aquaz recites that the radiant golden realm was born and tells all the mercenaries to step inside. They hurriedly thank her. Ashetiar menacingly grins and asks if it's really right to waste such a precious scripture. Aquaz tells her to shut up, so Ashetiar smilingly says that's how he should be. They rush forward and start attacking before Ashetiar jumps up and says, "Death is nothing more than death itself, and no one will ever recognize Aquaz's so-called sacrifice." She tells Aquaz that at this rate, he will lose and disgrace the honor of his god, but if he defeats her and returns, not only his prestige but his god's influence will rise as well. She says it's simple, just strip away the sanctuary that shields them. She asks Aquaz what he thinks, so he sees that Ashetiar would even resort to cheap tricks. Ashetiar chuckles and asks if he intends to die here, but Aquaz says it's not worth listening to her anymore, so Ashetiar tells him to die a martyr. She unleashes her power and rushes forward to attack, shocking Aquaz. He tries to fight her, but Ashetiar traps him inside a barrier, so Aquaz quickly recites that the radiant sanctuary drives back the darkness. However, Ashetiar covers his mouth and says she cares not to hear any more of her god's verses. She slams Aquaz down on the ground and attacks him with her hammer, but Aquaz swiftly blocks with his shield and struggles to hold his own against her. However, he isn't able to do so, and Ashetiar lands her attack before sending a beam of darkness into him, making him scream. As the mercenaries are standing inside the barrier, it slowly starts cracking. They realize they'll be killed at this rate. Ashetiar says she will savor them all as dessert, but before that, she grabs Aquaz and wonders what flavor the noble hound of God will have. She gets ready to take a bite out of him, but Katal grabs her shoulder and tells her to stop, saying she's gone far enough. Shocked, Ashetiar wonders when he appeared behind her since she couldn't sense his presence at all. Katal throws her into the sky and she crashes into the ground before he gives Aquaz a hand and asks if he's all right. Stunned, Aquaz remembers that he's the superhuman who defeated swordmaster Cain. Ashetiar slowly gets up and angrily asks Katal how he dared to interfere with her meal. Katal says Aquaz is his friend, so he can't just let him die, to which Ashetiar furiously says she was planning to keep him alive as a toy, but Ketil says he has no intention of ever becoming her toy. Ashetiar smilingly asks if that's really the case and says he'll just have to die. Aquaz tells Ketil to step aside and wearily says he cannot defeat a demon, so Ketil argues that he's quite strong. However, Aquaz says this isn't about strength or weakness. Only the divine can banish a demon from this world, and no other power can do so. That is the law set since the dawn, when gods and demons first existed, and Aquaz remarks that you can never hope for any miracles here, especially since it's within a demon's territory. Katal asks if only gods can oppose demons and says, even if that's true, it doesn't look like Aquaz is in any condition to fight. Aquaz says he still has to do it, he who serves the god, he who stands against evil. Katal sees that this is the will of one who serves the divine and tells Aquaz to leave this to him, acknowledging that he's impressive. He cheerily says he's been wanting to fight a demon himself, so Ashetiar says he really doesn't understand and reminds him that he can't defeat her. Katal asks if she'll care to test it, so she smilingly says she wants to see his eyes twist in agony. She teleports herself in front of Katal and gets ready to attack him, shocking Aquaz. However, Katal effortlessly punches her away, destroying her head in one blow, leaving Aquaz stunned.